Hey, it's Mariana, and thank you for joining me on the Commitment to Growth podcast, a platform dedicated to helping you build resilience for lifelong momentum. We chat about healing, mindset development, and how to live in your authentic truth, because often it's not our problems that cause our dissatisfaction, but everything around them that we haven't yet addressed. Thank you for joining me today, and let's get into this week's conversation. Welcome to the Commitment to Growth podcast, everyone. I am your host, Mariana, and I am also the founder of Commitment to Growth Resilience Coaching, where I am helping women heal cycles of dysregulation, disconnection, and disempowerment. And one of the ways that I am doing that this month is by bringing you conversations that are of a certain theme, is this new undertaking that I have taken on for 2024. And May's theme is all about how to allow more love into your life. Now, you might have just looked at the title of this episode and now you're like, how does authenticity relate to allowing more love into our lives? And I am here to tell you that it has everything to do with allowing more love into our lives. And I am very excited to show you why that is with the guests that I have brought on here to facilitate this task and to tell you why it's so important with me this month. And that is none other than Dr. Jonathan S. Marion. Now, before we get into the guest conversation, I introduce to you who we have for today's guest interview. I want to check in with you. How are you doing? How is your body feeling as you're going into this conversation? And what practices are you doing to allow more love into your life? Or maybe you found this episode because somewhere inside you, you know that it's something that you want for yourself, but you don't know quite how, or you don't know where that starts, or you're curious about how to do more of that in your life. And I just want to say I'm so grateful that you chose this conversation to help you acquire the tools to do that, because you absolutely deserve the love that you seek. And I am just so excited to take you through all the learning that is packed in this episode, because trust me when I say that this was like a mini coaching session for me. I am dead honest. Like, just listening, editing it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so valuable, and I am so excited to bring this to you this week. Now, who is the featured guest on this week's edition of the Commitment to Growth podcast? I have with me Dr. Jonathan S. Marion, who believes that when we live, connect, and communicate authentically, we send out ripples, which send out even more ripples, which make the world a more caring and connected place, one ripple at a time. Having seen this dynamic over 20 plus years as an award-winning cultural anthropology professor and author, Jonathan feels that how we show up is the key to living deeply meaningful and fulfilling lives. As a coach, consultant, and speaker, Jonathan draws on decades of experience teaching diverse audiences and is trained in emotional intelligence, group coaching, positive psychology coaching, clear beliefs coaching, and somatic coaching. What doesn't this man do? Jonathan is passionate about supporting clients and audiences in transcending external accomplishments as measures of success to live truly aligned, rewarding, and meaningful lives. And this conversation is nothing short of helping you see the reward that you can reap when you go inwards and choose your authenticity as the biggest reward for life, and how you can see that reward mirrored in your deepest relationships. So we are going to dive into not just that, but also Dr. Marion's being framework. Get ready to have your mind blown, because this framework stands for begin where you are, explore where you want to go, investigate how you want to get there, now start, and get your best life. Just listening to it, I was like, wow, I have to follow this road every time I set out on a new challenge, whatever that looks like. And you're going to hear it in this episode. We also dive into the importance of shifting from should to could in our thinking and actions, and how this shift can lead to more authentic connections and relationships, how cultural differences can shape relational dynamics and interactions, the difference between belonging and fitting in, and how creating authenticity with ourselves create authenticity with others. I am so excited, and I promise that by the time you finish this episode, you are going to learn why authenticity is so important when we're seeking depth and intimacy with other people. Because growth can only happen from authenticity. Growth can only happen in truth with yourself and others. And although those first steps towards creating that version of your life might be uncomfortable, it is absolutely necessary for you to go and receive and create for yourself the love that you desire. So fasten your seatbelts, make sure you are fully present for this conversation, maybe even go run and get something to write with, because you are going to want to jot down everything that Jonathan shares with us in this conversation. I am so excited to bring it to you this week, and have fun, enjoy, and learn as much as you can from the stimulating dialogue. I think I mentioned to you offline when we were kind of chatting about the details of this conversation. The monthly theme at Commitment to Growth is how to allow more love and connection into your life. So I just think that this is going to be a perfect conversation for people to learn how to do more of that, how to open themselves up to more of that. So why don't we start off by you telling us who you are, what you do, and why you do what you do?
Sure. So I currently work primarily as a transformational life coach, consultant, and speaker. And
Mm-hmm.
more than anything else, I work with people who are accomplished by external measures, but find that life is not as meaningful or fulfilling as they really thought it was going to be. And it's often because, again, we're looking at external measures of,
Mm-hmm.
satisfaction, accomplishment, and, the things we're supposed to want or to pursue and that aren't really authentic. And
Mm-hmm.
before that, I had a 20 plus year career as a cultural anthropology professor and found that it wasn't actually, as much as I love the discipline, it wasn't really authentic to who I am now and what mattered to me. And
Mm-hmm.
so I switched.
Beautiful. What was that transition like, or what was the catalyst that made you realize that you needed something different?
Yeah, so I think academia has changed a lot, especially in the US, where it's being run
Mm.
more and more by those business metrics of, again, it's accomplishment by external measures. So, what's your
Mm-hmm.
latest publication? What is the latest organization you've been elected to the board of? What's your latest
Mm.
grant? What are your latest teaching evals? What's the latest paper you've given at a conference? And in 2019, I was staying with a friend while I was on a research leave in Rio de Janeiro and
Mm-hmm.
realized that even though I was staying in a small, bedroom that was smaller than the size of my closet in my own
Mm-hmm.
house, that I felt
Mm-hmm.
more at home. And the more I thought about it, it had to do with quality of relationships. That the people
Mm.
who were my friends in Brazil, they knew what I did professionally. They were proud of me or proud for me, but they didn't care. They loved me, the person. And I realized
Mm-hmm.
that as long as I stayed in academia, it was never going to be about who I was as a person. It was only going to be those external measures. And
Mm.
that just wasn't the world I wanted to live in. And that isn't what I wanted to, have as the priority for the rest of my professional career.
Absolutely. I can relate to that a lot as someone who was going into medicine and kind of walked the pre-med route of you have to build yourself into this perfect portfolio of applicant who can juggle a social life, fitness, their mental health with 3 jobs, 3 volunteer opportunities, top tier grades, all that fun stuff. And it becomes this game of you're morphing yourself into a perfect something for somebody else, but really like when I had my kind of turning point in my life where I also decided to switch to life coaching, I was like, so much of what I've been doing has been for somebody else other than myself. Not that I didn't enjoy a lot of the things that I got to do, right? But it was so driven by this aspiration for impression onto somebody else. So what was it like for you kind of switching to a place where you could allow yourself to be seen and accepted for who you were versus your profession? Because that must have been quite something, I would imagine.
Yeah, it was a multi stage process. The first was figuring out what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
And when I thought about all of the parts of being, a tenured university professor, there's the
Mhm.
research, the service, and the teaching. And I'm good at
Mhm.
research. I've written, several books, but I don't love doing it. And I've been the
Mm.
president of different national organizations, and I'm good at it, but I don't love doing it. The
Mhm.
teaching, there was something that was resonating for me, but I realized that it wasn't the day-to-day teaching. It wasn't the everyday in the classroom. It was
Mhm.
those informal few moments, before and after class when students, were relating things to their own lives. or with
Mm,
my graduate students who, I'm not having them do research under me, like on my project. I'm helping them figure out what are their questions and how are they going to find their own answers.
okay.
Well, helping you figure out what are your questions and how are you going to find the answers that are right for you, that's life coaching.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I love that. What a beautiful transition. I haven't heard a backstory like that quite before. Now, maybe shifting into the work that you're doing now, how you took your background and have transformed it into this incredible career. What would you say are some of the core facets that people need to have authentic connections? Like when you coach people who are like, I'm lonely, I don't know who I am, what are the kinds of things that you guide them to reflect upon, or to the toolkit that you help them acquire to have that genuine connection with other people?
So I think for me, it really starts with we're human beings, not human doings. And that it's all
Mm-hmm.
of that attention to the what we do. So again, that what and the accomplishment that really gets in people's ways. And if we look at the
Mm-hmm.
being, I then use that as the acronym for sort of the framework. So B is for
Mm-hmm.
begin where you are, because
Mm-hmm.
all too often when someone wants a change, they're uncomfortable where they are in some way, which fully
Mm-hmm.
acknowledge, otherwise, why would they want to change?
Yeah.
But there can be a rush to move without really taking stock. And if you get
Mm-hmm.
in the car and try and use the GPS or on your phone, it actually needs a signal to know where it is first. It can't navigate if it doesn't know where it is. You could have the most
Mm-hmm.
detailed paper map in the world, but if you don't have that pin that says you are here, you can't navigate. And so I think it's
Yeah.
so important to realize, what are the skills, life experiences, strengths, challenges that I have in my life right here and now that I can
Mm-hmm.
bring to whatever situation I'm in. So begin where you are.
Okay. Yeah.
E is explore where you want to go. It's all too easy to say, I want to go on vacation. I want to get away from here. Okay, great. But where? Some people, if they're going on vacation, want
Mm-hmm.
the beach. Some people want the mountains. Some people want, museums and art galleries. And there isn't a right or wrong. It's what do you want at this point in your life? And so it's
Mm-hmm.
the same thing. If we're talking to someone, is it that, fine, they want to change the relationships in their life, but in what direction? That could mean so many things.
Mm-hmm.
For one person, it could be, I want to have more open communication with certain people. For someone else, it can be, I actually want to step away from this particular relationship. It's not serving me, it's draining.
Mm-hmm.
There's any number of possibilities. And so it's explore what really matters to you. And if it's career
Mm-hmm.
related, it can very much be, why are you pursuing that opportunity? Is it something
Mm-hmm.
that's really authentic to what matters to you or gives you an opportunity for something that matters to you? Or is it that we've all learned that we're just supposed to want to get the promotion, move up in the management ladder, et cetera? Well,
Mm-hmm.
but at what cost? Is it that, sure, maybe there's a little bit of a raise and maybe you have a slightly better office, but how much more time does it take from you? Is it
Yeah.
really applying the skills that you enjoy applying or just something you can do, but you actually find very draining? And so it's really
Mm-hmm.
exploring where are you going and is that really what you want?
Okay.
So that was our B and our E. Um, I is really for investigate how you're going to get between the two because
Okay.
there's lots of routes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's two steps to this. The most obvious one is just what are the possibilities? Do you want the most direct, the most scenic? Um, is there a particular, way you want to do things? And I think it's great. Start by brainstorming all of that. But then the thing that I think not so many people do is take time and think about in your life at major transition points, what have been the decisions that you've in the long run felt the best about and which are the ones you haven't? And then think about
Mm.
how have you made those decisions? And for one person, it might have to
Mm.
do
Okay.
with a pro and con list. For someone else, it might be, listening to their gut. For someone else, it might be,
Mm-hmm.
talking to close friends and family and seeing what they say. And so figure out
Okay.
how you've made your most fulfilling decisions. Now apply that to whatever list you've brainstormed. So B
Okay.
was begin where you are, E was
Right.
explore where you want to go, I is investigate how you want to go between the two. which
All
brings us
right.
to N, which is now start. Because all too
Mm,
often we're so busy trying to account for everything. It's also where perfectionism creeps in, that we don't
mm-hmm,
actually start anything. And I think the most important thing to realize here is if you actually know where you're beginning, where you want to go, and why you've chosen the route you're taking, you
mm-hmm,
can't get lost. If I'm driving home and there's a detour, okay, I take a detour, but I know where I'm going. I'm not
mm-hmm.
lost. If I'm driving home and I
Yeah.
think of, you know what, I'm here anyway, and I'd rather stop and run this errand now so it doesn't take me more time later, I'm not
Mm-hmm,
lost. It's a detour. And so, whereas if we never actually start, we're never going to get where we're trying to go.
mm-hmm,
And so, I think it's so important to just start, but understanding you're not going to get lost. Sure, things may change, but you know which route you're taking and why, and you'll just
mm-hmm.
adjust along the way.
Okay.
And once we've done that, the last phase of sort of the framework I work with is G for get your best life. And I don't mean it as a final
Mm.
arrival point, but I think all too often we get caught up in pursuing that we don't actually appreciate what we have. So you might also look at
Yeah,
G as gratitude in a certain way as well. And it's
absolutely.
recognize where you're at now versus when you started and what are the skills you've added and what clarity do you have now and what
Mm-hmm.
changes have you made and what is now part of your toolkit that wasn't before and what system do you have now that you could apply to anything else going forward in life that you didn't have before.
Absolutely. I'm buzzing because that's one of like the best ways I've ever heard that route explained and simplified into something that is so tangible because it really does come down to that who are you right now? Where do you want to get to? What do you have to do to start? And then working with inertia, right? As soon as you fire off that first step, everything else will start running into motion. But I think the key point in that is get your best life is you can stand in the energy that you're already living it as you're creating it, right? So I love that so much. Now, I think I want to break that down a little bit because I think that one of the things that I get asked a lot is sure, like I know who I am right now and I kind of know where I want to get to, but it's that E about what is your end goal that a lot of people can't clearly define. And it's a big conversation because some people will say, well, you don't have to have it clearly defined, like just start moving. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. But for a lot of us who maybe grew up in homes where in relation to connections, there was maybe not a lot of safe spaces, or we didn't grow up having very long term friendships or romantic relationships, right? Because of, we were breaking patterns and breaking generational traumas and all that fun stuff. That endpoint might be something that we're defining as we go, as we're learning, as we're taking in information about secure relationships and all that. When you have somebody tell you, well, I don't know what that endpoint is, but I know I want to get somewhere, how do you navigate them around that?
Let me say it this way to begin with. There isn't a right answer
Mm-hmm.
to this or anything else. Anyone who tells you they
Mm-hmm.
have the answer to something is a scary human being. Run. Um,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
so it's not this is the answer. It's here's how I think about it and approach it. And whatever works for someone is what's right for them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think from my
Mm-hmm.
perspective, we can come from either side. And so if we come from sort of the big picture endpoint, one of the exercises I often have people I'm working with do is sit down and, as if it's a screenplay, write out the scene of their ideal dream funeral and obituary. So,
Mm. Wow.
who's
Okay.
there
Mm-hmm.
and how do they feel? And what is the person remembered for? And what is spoken about them? And if you
Mm-hmm.
really think through what would really matter to you and not the, oh, this person founded a business and, left behind, this many yachts to their grandkids. Like, I think that's how we get caught up in that stuff. I don't think anyone dreams about that as their dream obituary. Maybe they do. I
Yeah.
don't know. Um,
Mm-hmm.
not the people who I feel are the most authentic human beings.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to say
Mm-hmm.
that you can't have wealthy people who are very authentic, but I don't think the dream for them is the wealth in and of itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So And I've seen this a couple of times. I was in early graduate school, and
Mm-hmm.
a former mentor of mine, who I never got to work with as much as I would have liked, unfortunately passed away, very tragic circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't able to make it to the funeral, but I heard about it from some mutual acquaintances. And you had people who were part of sort of like the sheriff's mountain rescue team and survival teams. You had bikers. You had Lakota Sioux, including medicine men. And the fact that one person
Mm-hmm.
could live a life where these people who otherwise lived such disparate experiences all showed up, all knew about each other, all
Mm-hmm.
knew the role that they had played for this one man's life. To me,
Mm-hmm.
that really was saying something about not just how you interacted with people, but just living your life in a very, not just authentic way, but in a way that resonated in every domain. And it was very different for
Mm-hmm.
me when in early 22, I was at my mother's funeral and uh, giving the eulogy. And there were really different phases of her life, but people from different phases didn't even really know about each other that much. Some did, but some didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, I don't think she was inauthentic with any of them, but it's just okay, but parts were kept separate. And so I think one
Mm-hmm.
starting point is just the who's going to be there? How are they going to feel? What is going to be
Wow.
said? That's one way to figure out what life you want to live. And then you
Mm-hmm.
can sort of do the reverse engineering. Okay, if that's the end point, where do I need to be 10 years from now? Where do I need to be 5 years from now to be there in 10 years? If I want to be there in 5 years, where in 3, where in 1, where in 6 months? And so we can
Mm-hmm.
start there.
Mm.
Flipping that entirely around, I think we can also start on the other side. And I think there's a lot of amazing work about, meaning and why. And so, right now, Simon Sinek and all of his work on why, if you go
Mm-hmm.
back to Viktor Frankl and logotherapy and the value of just finding meaning in your experiences, fantastic work. I recommend all of it. But I
Mm-hmm.
know for myself, when I'm in the heat of it, when life is overwhelming, whether it's competing commitments and pressures, whether it's just emotionally overwhelming, it's too big for me to get in touch with why. I think we can always start with how do I want to be? Not what do I want to do? How do I want to be?
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's, in this relationship, in this interaction, at this very moment, how do I want to be? And
Mm-hmm.
in the most overwhelming moments, I use a version that I've come to refer to as future casting. And
Okay.
it's because we've all had that experience where, 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years later, it's like, ah, shoot, I wish I had said, I wish I had done. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's, I know I am overwhelmed right here and now. When I am looking back at this in the future, how will I have wanted to have shown up? What will it
Phew.
be that I look back on and not go, I wish I had done it differently?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying it's easy to do, but the answer is pretty simple to find. And I remember
Yeah.
stumbling across this uh, early 2020. It most rewarding romantic relationship of my life up until that point
Mm-hmm.
sort of came to an end, caught me by surprise. It was long distance, and so we were having this phone conversation, and I just remember sitting there with tears streaming down my face, and her asking, do you want to keep talking? Do you want to call it quits at the
Mm-hmm.
moment and follow up later? And I said, give me a second. And for some reason, this just flashed into my brain. And I was like, I'm never going to have this moment to do over. And so I
Wow.
was just able
Yeah.
to say to her, I just want to, yes, I'm really sad and upset. And obviously you can hear that. But I
Mm-hmm.
want to, thank you for all of the amazing experiences and for this relationship and
Mm.
everything I've learned. But most of all, I want to thank you for being you. And
Wow.
so
Oof.
Whatever
Mhm.
else came up from me, at the time, later, thinking back and going, what if, what happened? I don't regret that. Like, I'm so comfortable with how I
Mhm.
left that because it was someone who's an amazing woman. And,
Wow.
um, that's where that, and I didn't have the name future casting at the time, but that's where I first sort of consciously did it and have then refined that into this idea of future casting. But you can
Mhm.
always just ask, how do I want to be? And I think if we show up in every moment being how we want to be, we'll get
Mhm.
to the end, which is a life we're really happy with, even if we didn't project out what that end was going to
Mhm.
be. So I think we can approach it from either side.
Holy smokes. Yeah, I have goosebumps as you told that story. That is so beautiful. And Abe, thank you so much for sharing that vulnerable story. But I think something that stood out to me so much in that is I'm leaning into the concept of and, right? Like you kind of getting at the G in your being acronym there, you can still be working towards your ideal life while feeling like you have it already. So you can be working towards it and you can feel that it's coming. In this case, it's you were sad, you were experiencing all these emotions from that conversation, and you were thinking about that future you that would one day be looking back on that moment. And that allowed you to show up in a way that was authentic and honoring and in gratitude towards the situation that you were living. I just think that that will liberate so many people and will just like that's such a perfect guiding point as to how to show up in a way that is honoring both people but also in a way that kind of shifts you out of letting perhaps the heaviness of a moment dictate how you show up in a way that you might regret later, right? Something that this like popped into my head and I was getting that was like flashing in the back of my subconscious as we were talking about the mentor that you didn't get to work with, and then your mother's funeral, and then the story you just told us about. There's a clip of Brene Brown in which she is talking about her research on shame, and she says that she was very surprised to learn in the literature that the opposite of belonging is fitting in, because fitting in is when you mold yourself, as we've kind of talked about in your academia experience and in my own experience as a pre-med. Fitting in is when you are molding yourself into something to, kind of be chunked between people so that you can say, oh, okay, I'm here, I'm in the crowd, I'm safe, right? But really it's where so much shame is born from, because all of a sudden you are now deriving safety from how you think people perceive you according to how you molded yourself versus deriving safety from being authentically yourself. So it was just very interesting to hear your story about your mentor and your mom as well, because my thought is, well, they arrived at a place where they could exist authentically and then all these people recognize them for it. I think a lot of people don't feel that way yet and are still learning how to derive safety from their own self-expression. So maybe relating it back to the now start, the N in the being acronym, when you're telling somebody now start showing up in your authenticity to derive that safety, what's the first step in that direction, would you say? Because that's really hard for a lot of people who've been chronic people pleasers, or self-abandonment is runs deep in their veins. So, mhm,
I find that oftentimes it actually gets in the way
mhm,
much earlier. It actually gets in the way back in the begin where you are. Because so
mhm,
often, where are we? We're not even being honest with ourselves about where we are, we ourselves.
mhm,
Because we're so caught up in these patterns of, you know, we're just habituated to different things and we have these different ideas of how things should be. And
mhm,
as one of my early coaching mentors pointed out, should is fighting with what is. And so, one of the things I
mm,
often have clients do very early on, or suggest to people I work with, is keep a journal. And every time they catch themselves thinking or saying should, on one side of the page, write it down if it's about themselves, on the other side of the page, if it's about something external to them.
mhm,
I'm not asking them to do anything with it, just write it down. But before they go to bed each night, go through it and cross out should and rewrite it with could. So all of a sudden it becomes, instead of
Mm,
my boss should recognize my work, my boss could. Instead of my coworker should do their fair share, they could. Instead of my kids
mm,
should listen to me, they could. Instead of I should go to the gym, I could. Instead of I should eat
wow,
better, I could. And
totally.
over time, like over, say, even just 2 weeks, you start to see patterns of, where do you have these ideas about the way things should be versus just being open to what is the reality. And if you say could, okay, but then it happened or it didn't, now what do you want to do? And so, in that
Mhm,
same way, now what do you want to do? Now start, now choose your action. And so, we
mm,
need to first be comfortable with acknowledging what actually is happening and not fighting ourselves that it should be a different way. Well, it isn't. What do you mean it should be? That's
absolutely.
either something that, is a personal belief or an internalized expectation from society
Mhm,
or your family or what have you.
absolutely. For somebody who is at that now start, phase in, say they come to you or myself about a romantic relationship or a familial relationship, and they're like, well, I should be more vulnerable, I should be more open, I should be more compassionate. What is perhaps the first step for maybe in the people that you've seen or in general when people are switching to that could, what are their biggest struggles, or what is something that you have found helps people really get the ball rolling towards more authentic connections?
Yeah, so I think that's where it's what's important about whichever one of those qualities you just mentioned, what's important about
Mhm.
that for you? Because
Mhm.
the moment that they're doing it because it's something they feel they should do,
Mhm.
it's not authentic. It's they're doing it because it's something they feel they're supposed to do. It's not
Yeah.
what they're actually feeling. Um,
Mhm.
Now, it could be that it's not that far away. It's like, well, I've read a lot and I feel that I'll be happier if I show up in this way. Okay, well, then let's change the
Mm.
language. It's not I should, it's I want to have the type of relationship which is only possible from this place. Okay, now we're
Mm.
talking a totally different ballpark than you're doing it because
Okay.
you think you should.
Mhm. Mhm. What do you think are the biggest kind of societal narratives that keep people chasing after something that isn't authentic to them when it comes to a relationship? Like whether it's a Hollywood conception of relationships that we have, I know that's a huge one, but also just things that you've seen in your work about just ideas that people have that aren't authentic to them about what they really want.
Yeah, so I think that, every culture has its narratives. And of course, as you mentioned,
Mhm.
Hollywood, is the whole idea of, the Hallmark channel rom-coms and
Mhm.
Valentine's Day and, um, things like that. And so
Mhm.
we have this ongoing narrative of what a relationship is supposed to look like. Well, supposed to look like what it should be. Well, should is fighting with what is. And it's
Mm.
the same as all of social media. We're looking at other people's highlight reel, whereas we
Mhm.
know all of the behind the scenes. And anyone who's ever worked in, you know, video, film, TV, there's how much more left behind that never makes it in by what
Yeah.
ratio, and how much more
Yeah.
time gets spent actually doing the editing, let alone the recording in the first place.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
so the recording is
Mhm.
multiple times longer than the final product, but the editing is even more than the recording time. And so the
Mhm.
minute that we buy into any of that, I think we're setting ourselves up for success, or sorry, for failure. And that
Mhm.
for success, what we really need to back off and do is, again, I think it goes back to the how. How do you want to relate to someone? And so the minute that we're talking about the relationship, I think we're already in trouble because the relationship
Mm.
doesn't exist. It's not a thing, it's not an object. There's relating, it's something we do with another person or other people. You know, we're
Mm. Okay.
relating to each other. So, how do I want to relate to them? How am I okay with them relating to me? Well, how am I okay with
Mhm.
them relating to me? Now we're talking boundaries. Um,
Mhm.
and again, in the healthy sense, it's saying this is what I feel comfortable with, and here are the things which feel inauthentic. And I'm selling out what actually is authentic to my values and who I want to be as a person to not actually adhere to this and to let other people, step on that. Um,
100%.
and I think then that has to do with the idea of, what's the most stable type of structure? Well, it's leaning in. Well, that's what boundaries are. It's
Mhm.
saying, I'm going to meet you here, but if you want to go there, I'm not willing to do that. Um,
Mhm.
well, it's not stable, right?
Absolutely. I love that you describe relationships like that because I think like, it just boggled my mind because I hadn't even thought about it as a way to describe it like that. I think it is so easy to kind of get into this narrative of, well, I'm doing this for the relationship. I'm doing this to cultivate a romantic, secure relationship. And it's like, yes, but language drives thought and thought drives action, right? So all of a sudden, when we use that language, it's really easy to get into this space of, well, this relationship is something that is external to myself and this other person that we are pouring. It's like a bucket that we're pouring into. But then it's like, no, it's actually what exists between both of you. And it's what's flowing back and forth between both of you. And it's how that energy flow between both of you is translating into the external world and into other areas of your life, right? I think that's such a beautiful reframe for people to feel more autonomy and more, I don't want to say control because we don't want to have that sense over a relationship, but really it's a way of just focusing on what's between you and the other person. Is that
Yeah,
fair?
I think it gives more agency, right?
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
if we take it back to, like, say, even a lot of people are familiar with the idea of love languages. Well,
Mhm.
if it's just, I'm going to express according to my love language for the sake of
Mhm.
the relationship, well, it
Yeah.
doesn't work because
Mhm.
the whole point is what is actually their love language, what actually counts for them. Now I'm providing, maybe it's not natural to me, maybe it's not what I want to receive, but if that's what matters to them, that's what I'm choosing. And therefore I'm
Mhm.
exercising that agency to demonstrate to that person that I truly care.
Absolutely. Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you for giving us that imagery because I think again, that'll give a lot of people the tools to have that other person focus while also having the capacity to address how they're pouring into the other person and how they're showing up to enhance that relatability to other person. Let's maybe bring in your background in cultural anthropology. I'm curious about kind of what you've seen either in your work or in the literature and your own experiences about what are some cultural differences. So, for example, we mentioned Hollywood. What are some cultural differences that make us maybe not relate to each other as much or have kind of walls up with each other that hinder quality of connection?
Yeah. So I think the starting point here is to recognize that, the complete arc of possibility for human thought and behavior is incredibly vast. And any
Mhm.
culture of like that complete arc is just carving out like a small wedge. And whatever
Mhm.
sort of central to that wedge is what's considered sort of normal. And whatever is more fringe is considered more fringe. And anything outside of that small wedge is considered abnormal. But
Okay.
it's not in a true sense. It's of what our culture values and has said is the range that we accept. And I think where we get into trouble so often is taking for granted that whichever thing we've grown up exposed to, familiar with, we take that as intrinsically more right or valuable or correct than anyone else. And so
Mm.
that's where I think we get into so much trouble. And
Mhm.
it may be the way I feel, and there's nothing wrong with that. It may be the way I think about things, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if at the same time I go, and someone who thinks or feels differently is therefore wrong, now we're really in a very
Mm.
problematic space.
Okay.
And so the way I used to always frame this for my students, no one on the planet wakes up in the morning, says, this makes no sense, I'm going to go do it. They just don't.
Uh-huh. Hmm.
And so they may not think it's good, but I guarantee you they think it makes more sense than any other alternative of which they're aware, or they do something different. And so I
Hmm.
refer to this as cultural logic. There is a logic behind it. And
Hmm.
so if instead of having that very accusatory, how could you think that? We have genuine curiosity of how is it that you do think that?
Hmm.
And fully trusting there is a reason in a way, well, now I can learn what that is. And we can apply the same thing to other individuals. It doesn't have to be at a cultural level. You may have
Hmm.
a belief that makes no sense to me, but rather than dismissing you and thinking you're wrong, having true curiosity, wait, I guarantee, I know for a fact that does make sense from some framework. It's not one I share, but let me explore and try to understand what's the framework.
Hmm.
I'm not
Hmm.
saying I have to agree whatsoever, but now I can actually start to build that bridge to understand.
Absolutely. I think it's it's about kind of that detachment from it's unmarrying your beliefs is what I like to call it, right? I think we get so stuck in thinking that what feels normal and familiar to us is what is the norm or what should be the norm for everybody else, but the human brain is so attached to that feeling of familiarity that we forget that people have a totally different perspective on the world, on relationships, on how things should and shouldn't be, that instead of using those differences as a way to see eye to eye and expand our horizons, we treat them like swords that we can use against each other. What would you say is the first step that somebody can take in maybe detaching from their beliefs for long enough to see a person's differences as something that will add to the relationship, for example?
Yeah, so I want to acknowledge that, you know, the way other people think and do things may not be right for you or for anyone else, right? So
Mhm.
it's not that it will add, but that it could add. And if we're
Mhm.
just willing to entertain the idea that this could add, now
Mhm.
we have a starting point.
Mhm.
And the human brain is wired to see patterns. There's nothing wrong with that.
Mhm.
But do we look at those patterns as I recognize something of a pattern and therefore I think I know everything about you? Or do we say, okay, I recognize something of a pattern, therefore do I have a starting point to see if that applies? So, for
Mhm.
example, when I used to teach culture and medicine, if I know someone's from a particular religious background, do I say, oh, okay, therefore I know this is your holiday and this is what type of food you need, which may or may not have be applicable to them at all? Or do I
Mhm.
say, oh, I noticed you're from this background. Are there things relating to holidays or to diet that I should be aware of or that would matter to you? And now we've opened up a
Mm.
dialogue. And
Absolutely.
so when I work in this space, I know a lot of people talk about, you know, diversity or DEI and things like that. I think this is
Mhm.
where some of my anthropology background comes in because, in the biological sense, diversity is a fact.
Mhm.
And so I very much look at it that way from a cultural perspective as well. People are different. Diversity is a fact.
Mhm.
But I tend to work from a lot of people use the JEDI acronym: justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And
Mhm.
so, do I want things to just feel good or be good? And so, if
Oof.
I want to work
Yeah.
with that idea of like actually having some justice, having some equity, and for people who aren't familiar, the idea of equity versus equality, equality would be, say, we're giving everyone a bike, but we're giving everyone an identical bike. Well, the
Yeah.
same bike doesn't work for someone who's a kid and 3.5 feet tall and someone who's 6.5 feet tall. Equity
Exactly.
is saying we're going to give each person a bike that fits them.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so if I'm working from this framework, well, if you take, you know, JEDI, Jedi, I grew up, of course, watching the original Star Wars trilogy, not the later versions.
Yeah.
And what do the Jedi use as their main sort of tool? They use the Force. And so I use
Mm.
that as an acronym to really think through how to approach this. And so we've already talked about the F in that. What is the framework? What is the framework this person is coming from? What is their worldview?
Mhm.
What is it that, is the system from which they are operating? And
Mhm.
I can always investigate that. I can always try and understand that. I can always ask a question.
Mhm.
From there, we move to O. What are the optics? So, from that framework, what does the world look like? What does this situation look like? What does this interaction look like?
Mhm.
And
Okay.
from there, we can move on to R, which can be for review or reflect. And that's giving the other person a chance to give us some feedback.
Mhm.
I've now said, okay, I think I understand the framework. I think I understand what it looks like, but let me review that with you. Let me give that to you. Let me give you an opportunity to reflect back. Do I have that right or don't I? Which is where we move into
Mhm.
C. It's a chance to clarify and correct. Help me
Yeah.
understand where you're really coming from.
Mhm.
Now we can move into E. Now we can explore what's really the situation between us. Now we can explore where we can come together, where we might be able to understand each other better.
Absolutely. I love that because I think that when we're building that depth of connection, it's really easy to tell ourselves that we have to completely like merge our experience with that of another person, right? And we have to see and value everything the exact way that they do. But what that acronym really gets at, correct me if I'm wrong, is no, what you're opening the floor to is for you to experience the world through that person's eyes in a way that you can choose to adopt into your own worldview or embrace their ideologies or their beliefs, but it's not imposing anything on you. And I know that that's a huge kind of point of contention in today's society, especially in the work of EDI and such, right? Like people want to be seen, people want to be recognized for the identity that they're trying to express themselves within, and instead of trying to see it as they wish to be seen, as they wish to be heard, it's like, well, you're imposing your experience on me and you're making me take on your values, and no, no, no. It's like, no, it's just, this is my experience. It's not that you have to adopt it, but this is how I want to meet eye to eye with you through it. Is that fair?
Absolutely. And it goes back to when you used Brene Brown's example of fitting in
Hmm.
versus belonging. Well,
Yeah.
think about puzzle pieces. How do they
Hmm.
fit together? Well, they only fit if they take on an exact shape. And
Hmm.
so maybe that's not authentic to who they are and how they want to show up and what their experiences are. And saying, well, you
Hmm.
only fit in if you are the exact shape that fits into our puzzle.
Hmm.
That's not belonging. Belonging is saying, we're going to find a way to fit all of these things together. And so think of it more like stained glass, different
Hmm.
colors, different shapes, and I'm going to put them together in a way that makes sense and that is appealing. And I'm not going to try and use different pieces in the same way if they're different sizes, different colors. I'm going to say, what's the quality of each one and how do those all fit together in the best way?
Absolutely. Like stained glass. I love that. Jonathan, thank you so much. I think that's a beautiful note to end on. One tradition that we do on the podcast here is every guest gets a rapid fire round of 3 questions at the end of the conversation. So the first two are the same for each guest, and the third is unique to each guest. So we'll play if you're up to it.
I'm up to it.
Okay, fantastic. So your first question is, what is your favorite quote?
Hmm. It goes back and forth from time to time, but
Mhm.
probably Rabbi Hillel. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?
Oh, wow. Can you repeat that one more time
Yeah.
so people really
If
digest
I
it?
am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not
Mhm.
now, when?
And if not now, when? Wow. I love that. That's like bridging the human experience so beautifully into one sentence. Thank you so much. I love that. Your second question is, what song is currently stuck in your head?
I don't know how many people say this, but really there isn't.
Oh,
I uh, Once I started dancing a lot, I stopped listening to music except when I'm dancing because whenever I hear music, my body
Oh.
tries to figure out what rhythm or how I'd choreograph to it, and so I can't pay attention to whatever I'm doing. So I've
Okay.
stopped listening to music except when I'm like doing Brazilian zouk or some other dance forms.
Oh, cool. Is that more instrumental then, or does it have words as well?
It can be danced to a lot of different music, a lot of contemporary stuff. Yeah,
Okay.
it's a rhythm and wide range of music.
I love that. Brazilian Zouk. I'm gonna listen to put on a Zouk playlist after this. That's awesome. Okay. Your final question is unique to you, and it is in your being framework, be is be as you are. Can you remind me what
Begin
B
where you
stood?
are.
Begin where you are. Okay. Where are you beginning where you are right now? What's your B?
Yeah, I love that because it is an iterative process. It's not you've begun once, right? And
Mhm.
so I am right now in the final phase of a transition phase, and
Mhm.
probably, hopefully, by the end of June, will actually be moving here to Portugal as my new home base. And
Oh,
so
wow.
my newest beginning is to actually be based in Europe and
Mm.
live a life that's entirely different from the academic one. And we're beginning to build a whole new uh, base and set of connections that's not just transitory. As I've been a
Mm.
full-time nomad for over 2 years and haven't been anywhere
Wow.
for over 7 weeks in the past 2.5 years.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So building a home,
Yeah, building a
kind of,
new set of roots and
I love that.
yeah,
Amazing. That's amazing. I'm so happy for you. I'm excited to see what that transition brings for you. I'm so jealous too. I haven't been to Europe yet as we're recording this. So it's on the bucket list for the recent future items to do. How can people find you after this conversation?
absolutely. The quickest way is just steps2chat.com. It'll redirect you to my website and my booking link. My name of my business is stepsalongtheway.global. And
Mhm.
again, I think where we all are in our lives is the steps we've taken to get here. And getting our best lives is being intentional about the steps we take next. And with how much
Mm.
I travel and that my cultural anthropology background, stepsalongtheway.global is the website, but just steps2chat.com. And I really believe in ROI as ripples of impact, not as return on investment. And so I think showing
Mhm.
up, authentically and how we each want to impacts the people who we interact with. And so
Mhm.
steps2chat.com, get on my schedule, 30 minutes, completely complimentary, no strings attached, free
Mhm.
chance to just chat for 30 minutes. And that's part of how I want to show up is just to, have those interactions with people and see what value I can add. And if
Mhm.
I make sense for you to work with at some point, great. And if I don't, that's okay too.
Exactly. It's just about adding value to each other's lives at the end of the day, right? So,
Absolutely.
Jonathan, thank you so much on everything, the wisdom, the framework, so many of them that you brought to this conversation, and very excited for people to get their hands and ears on this conversation. I know it's going to be very soul shifting for a lot of people, and thank you so much. I look forward to seeing what this transition brings for you.
Thank you so much for having me, Mariana. Take care.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that wonderful, exciting, stimulating, and expansive conversation with Dr. Jonathan S. Marion. I know I gained loads and loads from that conversation and so much inspiration and so much guidance on how I want to cultivate more authenticity in my life and the roadmap to do so. Remember, if you just got here and it's your first time, or you haven't listened to the previous episode in May series of how to allow more love into your life, it is called It's Not That You Fear Love, It's That You Fear Being Seen. It is available everywhere that you get your podcasts. All you have to do is go to www.commitmentogrowth.com/podcast. And there you can get the link to wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this episode or any more that you find interesting and useful to your friends and family who might like to hear them and might need to hear them as well. We're trying to spread the message of resilience and authenticity and purpose to more of the community as much as we can. Remember as well, if you didn't hear, that my abundant coaching container is now open for enrollment until May 30th. This is a 3-session coaching bundle with me, one-on-one, 60 minutes each session, where you will get one-on-one help on discovering and unearthing the seeds that are blocking you from the love that you want to create in your life. Whether it's as simple as you have a really hard time receiving compliments and you want to maybe explore how that might be feeding into self-sabotage or simply blocking you from more love and depth in your relationships, or you're looking to explore your attachment style more, like if you're like me, you're an anxious girly, or you elicit avoidant tendencies, whatever that is, and you're looking to cultivate tools to help you regulate your attachment styles in new interactions, your current relationship, or maybe you're looking to enter the dating world, this container is meant for you if you're ready to take the next step towards creating more abundance in your life by rewiring your brain and your beliefs that are keeping you in cycles of fear. So, with your enrollment into this bundle, you also get access to my Healing the Inner People Pleaser Masterclass, my Identity Based Goals Masterclass, and my Healing the Inner People Pleaser Workbook, which right now is for sale on my website, but you get it completely for free. So that's 3 one-hour sessions one-on-one with me, 2 masterclasses, and a workbook. And it can be all yours if all you do is answer the 3 questions in the questionnaire that I have linked to this episode. 3 questions takes 2 minutes or less if you're really speedy, and I will follow up with the next steps for that. So make sure that you send those in. Tell me a little bit about yourself in the questionnaire, and I will reach out to you after that if this is a radical step towards your self-transformation that you are ready to make in your life. Again, don't forget to subscribe, like the episode, send it to somebody who needs to hear it. Make sure you stick around for future episodes. I also just made my debut on YouTube by making my first video called Why You Fear Opening Your Heart Up to Love. Make sure you check that out at the end of this episode if you're curious on a little 7-minute teaser as to the 2 reasons why we usually block ourselves from love. Follow me on Instagram. It's at Commitment to Growth on Instagram and TikTok. Make sure you stay connected for future updates on the podcast and what's going on in the coaching business, because there's always exciting stuff going on. And once again, thank you so much for tuning in and listening today. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And don't forget to embrace every beautiful side of who you are, because every beautiful side of who you are deserves to be seen, loved, and held. Thank you so much for being here today, and I will see you in the next episode.